The sky above the Orchard of Serenity was not a sky at all, but a shimmering veil of suspended light, fixed in a perpetual, golden afternoon. Elara stood at the precipice of the terrace, her hand hovering just inches from a fruit that pulsed with the rhythmic luminescence of a heartbeat. She had lived 1,000 years in this afternoon, yet the silence of the garden was becoming a deafening roar. Why does a bird sing if there is no winter to fear? Why does a soul yearn to expand when the walls of its universe are already painted in perfection? To exist in the orchard was to reside within a masterpiece of static divinity. Here, hunger was a myth, and fatigue was a forgotten language. The architecture of this existence was composed of soft gradients and effortless abundance. Every desire was met before it could fully bloom into a thought. But as Elara reached for the fruit, she felt the phantom sting of a question she dared not voice. Is a life devoid of friction truly a life, or is it merely an elaborate, gilded exhibit? She retreated, her fingers trembling. The orchard demanded gratitude, a gentle hum of appreciation that resonated through the soil itself. Yet, the longer she lingered in the center of the garden, the more she felt herself fraying at the edges, like a tapestry left too long in the sun. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight of completeness. In a world where every potentiality had been exhausted by design, the only thing left to do was to wither in the stillness. She turned away from the tree, wandering toward the perimeter where the velvet grass met the impenetrable, crystalline wall that defined their horizon. There was a rhythmic pulse against the barrier, not from the outside, but from the depths of her own mind. It was the whisper of the unknown. She realized then that the comfort of the orchard was not a gift, but a tether. It was a perfectly calibrated prison of sunlight, designed to keep the spirit in a state of suspended infancy, forever nourished, but never allowed to grow teeth. She sat upon a moss-covered stone, closing her eyes. She imagined the world beyond the veil, not as a place of shadows, as the legends had whispered, but as a chaotic, unscripted expanse. She saw images of storms, of seasons that stripped the branches bare, of creatures that had to hunt for their purpose. It was a terrifying, jagged vision, yet it possessed a vitality that the orchard lacked. The orchard was a symphony composed of a single, endlessly repeating note. To step beyond it would be to enter a composition that was still being written. Her pulse quickened. The psychological tension was not a feeling of impending doom, but rather the unbearable pressure of a seed buried too deep beneath the earth. It was the desire to reach for the surface, to break the shell, and to confront the harsh brilliance of a sun that was not a backdrop, but a consuming fire. She looked at her hands, which were smooth and unscarred. They were the hands of a statue, not a creator. She stood again, her resolve crystallizing in the quiet air. The realization hit her with the force of an oncoming tide. True peace is not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of it. To live in paradise without the capacity to lose, it was to possess nothing at all. She needed to feel the chill of the evening wind. She needed to know the exhaustion that comes from laboring toward a goal that was not guaranteed. The orchard offered an eternal today, but the soul was built for the journey of tomorrow. She walked back toward the shimmering tree, the air thickening with a strange, magnetic static. The fruit seemed to sense her awakening. Its light flickered, mirroring the shifting intensity of her intent. She understood now that the orchard was not a home, but a cradle, and she had outgrown its dimensions long ago. The walls were not there to keep the darkness out. They were there to keep the infinite potential of the human spirit contained. She placed her hand on the trunk of the central tree, feeling a vibration that was ancient and resonant, a heartbeat that matched her own. It was a call to departure, a siren song of the wilderness waiting on the other side of the veil. She realized that the decision to leave was not an act of defiance, but an act of graduation. To accept the vulnerability of the world was to reclaim the sovereignty of the self. The golden afternoon began to waver. She saw, for the first time, the faint, hairline fractures in the sky veil above her. They were not flaws, but invitations, the thin places where reality was waiting to break through. She inhaled deeply, tasting the static, the ozone, and the faint, intoxicating scent of change. She had spent an eternity as an observer of grace. She was now ready to become a participant in the architecture of existence. She turned one last time to look at the garden, her gaze sweeping over the serene, unchanging beauty that had defined her entire history. There was no bitterness, only a profound, crystalline clarity. She was no longer a subject of the design. She was the architect of her own departure. With a steady breath, she reached up, not to pick the fruit, but to touch the very fabric of the veil itself, ready to tear it asunder and walk into the uncertainty that promised, finally, to be real. The veil had parted, yet the transition was not a leap into freedom, but a descent into a labyrinth of mirrors. Elara found herself standing in a landscape of shifting dunes and obsidian crags, where the silence of the orchard was replaced by a low, melodic humming, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very air she breathed. Before her stood a figure draped in robes of shifting smoke, whose eyes held the depth of ancient, unread scrolls. This was the Catalyst, the keeper of the crossroads, standing not as a herald of ruin, but as a mirror reflecting her own fractured curiosity.
You seek the horizon, but you carry the ghost of the garden in your stride. You mistake the weight of your own doubt for the burden of the world.
Elara felt the temperature drop, the air turning sharp and crystalline. She reached for the familiar comfort of her internal narrative, the story she had constructed to justify her departure, but the words felt hollow. The figure tilted its head, and the surrounding dunes began to shift, forming geometric patterns that mimicked the perfection she had left behind. It was a psychological trap. The landscape was no longer an external terrain, but a projection of her own cognitive dissonance. She had desired the wild, yet her mind reflexively sought to architect it into a manageable order.
I am not afraid of the wild.
Fear is the least of your concerns. You are paralyzed by the architecture of your own ego. You left the orchard, yet you are still trying to maintain the illusion that you are the master of your destiny. You are playing a game of shadows, defining yourself by what you reject rather than what you are becoming.
This was the serpent's logic, not a temptation toward darkness, but an invitation to confront the inherent instability of the human condition. The figure pointed toward the horizon, where the sky was not golden, but a turbulent canvas of bruised violets and jagged, electric whites. It was beautiful, terrifying, and profoundly indifferent to her presence. The psychological suspense coiled in Elara's gut, the realization that her sense of self was a fragile construct, built upon the shifting sands of her own perceptions.
Why do you keep me here?
I do not keep you. I am merely the dissonance that allows you to hear the melody of your own limitations. You wish to be the architect, yet you have not yet learned how to stand in the storm without attempting to stop the rain.
As the figure dissolved, the geometric patterns of the dunes collapsed. The ground beneath Elara's feet became unstable, turning into a tide of fine, gray dust. She felt the sudden, vertigo-inducing sensation of losing her footing, not in the physical sense, but in the existential one. All the certainty she had brought from the orchard, the belief that she was an explorer, a seeker, a pioneer, slipped through her fingers like sand. She was standing in the center of a psychological tempest. The ego, that sturdy fortress she had built to house her identity, was being eroded by the relentless tide of uncertainty. She realized that every decision she made, every step she took, was an attempt to regain control, and that this very need for control was the source of her suffering. It was a paradox of the soul. To reach the light, she had to stop fighting the darkness and instead learn to navigate the eclipse. She sat upon the shifting ground, breathing in the cold, thin air. She observed the chaos with a detached, clinical eye. The thoughts that raced through her mind, the doubt, the regret, the desperate desire for a path, were not enemies to be conquered, but data to be integrated. She understood now that the serpent had not led her astray. It had led her to the threshold of her own shadow. It had forced her to see the parts of herself that were still clinging to the nursery of the orchard. She took a handful of the gray dust and watched it fall, grain by grain. Each grain was a moment, a choice, an observation. The perfection of the orchard had been a monolithic block of marble, unyielding and eternal. This current reality was sand, malleable, flowing, and infinitely recombinable. She had the power to reshape it, but only if she relinquished the desire for the finished monument. The wind howled, a symphony of discordance that challenged her to harmonize with it. Elara closed her eyes, letting the turbulence wash over her. She stopped defining herself by her past actions or her future goals and anchored herself in the visceral, terrifying present. She was not a creature of the garden or a ghost of the wilderness. She was the process of becoming. The psychological tension began to recede, replaced by a strange, hollowed-out clarity. She was empty of the old self, and in that emptiness, there was an expanse of infinite capacity. She realized that she did not need a map for the wilderness, because the wilderness was not a place to be mapped. It was a state of being to be inhabited. She opened her eyes, and the horizon no longer looked like an adversary. It looked like a vast, unwritten page, waiting for the ink of her existence to stain it with purpose. She stood up, her legs steady against the shifting dunes, and began to walk, not toward a destination, but into the deepening mystery of the wind. The dust of the shifting dunes finally settled, not into a monument, but into a path. Elara stood upon the ridge, the cold, invigorating air of the wilderness filling her lungs with a sharpness she had never known in the gilded, stagnant silence of the orchard. She looked back one final time, not with regret, but with the quiet reverence one holds for a cradle they have long since outgrown. The shimmering veil of the garden had become little more than a whisper of heat haze against the horizon, a memory of a childhood spent in a room with painted windows. She realized then that the journey was never about escaping the garden, nor was it about conquering the wilderness. It was about the transfiguration of the soul through the alchemy of experience. In the orchard, she had been a static observer of a predetermined perfection, a note in a symphony that could never deviate from its score. Here, in the unscripted expanse of the unknown, she was both the author and the ink. The thorns and thistles she encountered were not punishments. They were the essential friction required to forge a character of substance. Resolution arrived not in a grand, climactic victory, but in a subtle, internal quietude. She understood that the fall that the ancients whispered of in fearful tones was, in truth, the first genuine act of human agency. To choose the wilderness was to choose the capacity for growth, for error, and for redemption. She had traded the counterfeit comfort of a closed system for the terrifying, beautiful privilege of an open future. The vulnerability she had feared, the risk of loss, the weight of responsibility, was the very thing that anchored her to reality. Without the possibility of losing her way, she could never truly claim the triumph of finding it. She walked forward, her footsteps leaving a clear, deliberate mark upon the earth. The sky above had cleared, revealing a tapestry of stars that seemed to hum with the same resonant vibration she had felt within the heart of the tree. Everything was connected. The dust of the earth and the light of the stars were made of the same essence, and she, in all her fragility, was the bridge between them. She was no longer seeking a destination. She was embodying the journey. This was the architecture of a life lived with intention. It was a structure built not of gold or marble, but of resilience, insight, and the quiet courage to face the horizon without a map. She had synthesized the wisdom of the ancients with the demands of the present, learning that the true sanctuary is not a place we find, but a space we create within the architecture of our own minds. When we stop searching for a return to a paradise that never existed, we begin to build the garden where we stand. As she reached the crest of the final hill, the world opened up before her, a vast, unfolding vista of possibility. The sun began to rise, not in a display of artificial gold, but in a spectrum of authentic, waking light. It illuminated the path ahead, highlighting the terrain with all its rugged beauty, its peaks and its valleys, its challenges and its hidden treasures. She stood there, a traveler who had navigated the labyrinth of her own shadow and emerged on the other side, whole and ready to begin. The narrative of her existence was no longer a story written by external hands. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of the human spirit to reclaim its sovereignty. She looked toward the morning, feeling the weight of the past fall away like dried leaves in autumn. There was no need to look back, for the wisdom of the journey was already woven into the fabric of her being. She was the seeker, the explorer, and ultimately, the architect of her own unfolding destiny. In the silence of the new morning, she spoke a single word of gratitude, not to a distant sky, but to the strength she had discovered within the depths of her own soul. The orchard had promised her eternity, but the wilderness had given her something far more precious. The present moment, raw and unadorned, waiting to be shaped by the force of her will. She took a deep, steady breath, stepped forward, and began to write the next chapter of her story, one deliberate, purposeful heartbeat at a time. The path was unpaved, the horizon was infinite, and for the first time in her history, she was entirely, profoundly home.